The world has always seen the Irwin family as one of the most inspiring wildlife families on the planet, a family built on love, adventure, laughter, and a deep passion for protecting animals. For years, people admired how the legacy of Steve Irwin continued to shine through the lives of his children, especially through the bright and energetic spirit of Robert Irwin. Robert grew up in front of the world's eyes. From the moment he was a little boy following his dad around the Australia Zoo, fans could see that he had inherited that same fearless curiosity, the same spark, the same love for crocodiles, snakes, and every creature that most people would run away from. But growing up in the shadow of a legendary father isn't always easy. Even when the love in the family is strong, the pressure of carrying such a powerful legacy can create unexpected challenges. Robert has spent most of his life honoring his father's mission. Whether he's rescuing animals, educating young audiences, or appearing on major television shows like Dancing with the Stars, he has always tried to stay true to what his father believed in: protecting wildlife and inspiring people to care about the natural world. Fans love Robert not just because he reminds them of Steve, but because he brings his own charm to everything he does. He has a warm, playful personality. He jokes with fans, laughs easily, and somehow manages to make dangerous animals seem like old friends. But behind that cheerful energy, there's a young man trying to balance family expectations, personal dreams, and the responsibility of continuing one of the most beloved wildlife legacies in the world. As Robert has grown older, his role in the Irwin legacy has naturally evolved. He's no longer just Steve Irwin's son. He's becoming a public figure in his own right, a photographer, a wildlife conservationist, a television personality. And with that growth sometimes comes differences in perspective. Families often disagree about the best way to move forward, especially when something as important as a legacy is involved. In the Irwin family, that legacy isn't just about fame or television shows. It's about a mission that means everything to them. Steve Irwin dedicated his life to wildlife conservation. His message was simple: if people fall in love with animals, they'll want to protect them. That message turned him into a global icon. For Robert, honoring that message is deeply personal. Every crocodile he handles, every animal rescue he participates in, every conservation project he supports feels like another chapter in his father's story. But Robert also belongs to a new generation. He understands the power of modern media, social platforms, and new ways of connecting with audiences. He's passionate about reaching younger viewers who might never have grown up watching Steve's television adventures. Sometimes that means trying fresh ideas. Maybe it's sharing behind-the-scenes moments. Maybe it's showing a lighter side of wildlife conservation. Maybe it's adding humor and personality to the mission. And Robert definitely has humor. People who meet him often say he's surprisingly funny. Between wrestling crocodiles and photographing wild animals, he loves cracking jokes and making the people around him laugh. There's something charming about a guy who can hold a giant snake one moment and then laugh about getting muddy boots the next. But when you're part of a famous family, every decision can feel bigger than it really is. Different opinions about how to carry forward a legacy can sometimes create tension, not because people don't care, but because they care so much. For Robert, the most important thing has always been respect for his father. He has spoken many times about how Steve wasn't just a wildlife expert. He was a loving father who encouraged curiosity, kindness, and courage. Robert often shares stories about growing up around animals. Some kids grew up playing video games in their living rooms. Robert grew up watching crocodiles swim past the dock. He learned to respect wildlife before he even learned to ride a bike. And somehow that childhood shaped his entire outlook on life. He believes that conservation shouldn't feel like a lecture. It should feel like an adventure. He wants people to feel excited when they see wildlife. He wants them to laugh, smile, and fall in love with animals the way he did.
That's part of why audiences connect with him so strongly. There's something genuine about Robert. He doesn't pretend to be perfect. Sometimes he slips in the mud. Sometimes an animal surprises him. Sometimes things don't go exactly as planned. And when that happens, he laughs. That honesty makes people feel like they're on the adventure with him. But the heart of Robert's journey is still family. His bond with his mother and sister has always been a huge part of the story. They built their lives together around the mission that Steve started. Australia Zoo became more than just a workplace. It became a symbol of everything Steve believed in. Every animal cared for there represents the same message Steve spent his life sharing with the world. And Robert knows that protecting that message matters. At the same time, he's discovering who he is as an individual. He loves wildlife photography. In fact, many of his photos have gained international recognition. His images capture animals in ways that feel powerful, emotional, and sometimes even playful. It's another way of telling the story of conservation. Instead of television cameras, sometimes it's just Robert, a camera lens, and a wild landscape waiting for the perfect moment. Those quiet moments might be very different from the loud excitement people remember from Steve's adventures. But in a way, they reflect the same passion. Both father and son share the same belief: wildlife deserves respect and protection. Robert just expresses that belief in his own style. Sometimes it means bringing humor into serious conversations. Sometimes it means showing the beauty of nature through photography. And sometimes it means stepping into new opportunities that allow him to reach different audiences. His appearances on television have introduced him to millions of viewers who might never have followed wildlife conservation before. And every time he smiles at the camera while holding a snake or explaining an animal's behavior, you can almost see a little piece of Steve Irwin shining through. Fans often say the resemblance is incredible. The same bright eyes, the same enthusiasm, the same excitement when talking about animals. But Robert isn't trying to replace his father. He's trying to continue the spirit of what Steve started while adding his own personality to the journey. That balance can be complicated. When a legacy is this meaningful, every decision carries emotional weight. But the one thing that has never changed is Robert's love for wildlife and his desire to make his father proud. Even when challenges appear, that passion remains the heart of everything he does. And perhaps that's the most beautiful part of the story. Legacies aren't meant to stay frozen in time. They grow with the people who carry them forward. Robert Irwin represents a new chapter in the story of conservation, a chapter filled with humor, courage, curiosity, and a deep respect for the natural world. Just like his father, he wants people to see animals not as something distant or scary, but as incredible living beings worth protecting. And when fans watch him work with wildlife, many of them feel the same inspiration they felt years ago watching Steve Irwin explore the wild. The adventure continues, the mission continues, and the Irwin legacy continues to evolve through the passion of the next generation. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more inspiring journeys about your favorite personalities and unforgettable legacies, make sure to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about fame or headlines. They're about family, passion, and the courage to carry a dream forward.
Robert continued to grow into his role as a wildlife conservationist, something interesting began to happen. People no longer saw him only as the son of a legend. They began to see him as a storyteller in his own right. A young man who could make people laugh, feel inspired, and care deeply about the natural world. For many fans who grew up watching Steve Irwin, seeing Robert Irwin step confidently into the spotlight felt emotional. It was almost like watching a familiar spirit return, but with a new voice and a fresh sense of adventure. Robert had always been comfortable around animals. That part of his life never felt strange or unusual to him. While most people might feel nervous standing near a crocodile enclosure, Robert often looks as relaxed as if he's standing in his own backyard. And in many ways, he is. Growing up at the famous zoo built by his family meant that wildlife wasn't just a job, it was part of everyday life. Morning routines sometimes included feeding animals. Family conversations often revolved around conservation projects. And dinner table stories might involve a rescued animal or a new habitat being built. For Robert, these moments were normal, but for the rest of the world, they were fascinating. As he matured, Robert also discovered something else about himself. He had the ability to connect with people just as naturally as he connected with animals. Whenever he appears in interviews or public events, there's a warmth in the way he speaks. He doesn't sound rehearsed or overly polished. Instead, he sounds like someone who genuinely loves what he's talking about. And that authenticity is rare. People are drawn to it. Whether he's discussing wildlife conservation, sharing funny stories from the zoo, or joking about the unexpected surprises animals sometimes bring, Robert has a natural ability to keep audiences entertained. Sometimes those surprises are hilarious. There have been moments when animals suddenly decided to steal the spotlight in the most unexpected ways. A curious kangaroo hopping into a shot, a mischievous bird trying to grab something shiny, or a reptile deciding that the camera equipment looks like an interesting new toy. Instead of getting frustrated, Robert laughs. He often turns those chaotic moments into funny stories, reminding people that nature doesn't always follow a script. And that's part of what makes wildlife so magical. But while Robert's public life often looks exciting and joyful, there's also a deeper emotional layer to his journey. Carrying forward the legacy of Steve Irwin isn't just a professional responsibility, it's something deeply personal. Robert has spoken many times about the memories he holds from his childhood with his father. Even though those memories belong to a time when he was very young, they continue to guide him. He remembers the enthusiasm Steve had for every animal encounter. He remembers the laughter, and he remembers the message that always came first. Love wildlife, respect wildlife, and protect wildlife. That message became the foundation of Robert's life. Even as new opportunities appeared, television appearances, photography projects, and global recognition, Robert stayed focused on that same mission. His participation in shows like Dancing with the Stars introduced him to audiences who might not have followed wildlife conservation before. Suddenly, people who had never watched a nature program were curious about the young man with the adventurous spirit and infectious smile. Some fans tuned in because they loved the show. Others came because they remembered Steve. But many stayed because they discovered Robert himself. They saw his passion, his humor, his kindness toward animals, and that combination made him incredibly likable. It also helped him reach a new generation of viewers. Young people who spend most of their time online suddenly found themselves interested in wildlife conservation because Robert made it feel exciting instead of overwhelming. He proved that caring about animals doesn't have to be serious all the time. Sometimes it can be fun. Sometimes it can be playful. Sometimes it can even be a little romantic, especially when you think about the idea that humans and nature are connected in ways we often forget. Robert often talks about how peaceful it feels to be surrounded by wildlife. Standing quietly in nature, listening to birds, watching animals move through their natural habitats, these moments remind him why conservation matters. They remind him that the planet is full of incredible life that deserves protection. And when he shares those experiences with the world, people start to see nature differently. Suddenly, a crocodile isn't just a scary creature. It's part of a delicate ecosystem. A snake isn't just something to fear. It's a fascinating species with its own role in the balance of nature. Through Robert's storytelling, wildlife becomes something people feel connected to. And that connection is exactly what his father always hoped to create. Of course, the road ahead will always bring new challenges. Any legacy as powerful as the one built by Steve Irwin will continue to evolve with each generation. But Robert seems ready for that responsibility. He carries the past with respect, but he also looks toward the future with excitement. And perhaps that's what makes his story so compelling. It's not just about honoring a legendary father. It's about discovering how the next generation can take that mission and expand it in new directions. Robert Irwin's journey is still unfolding. More adventures await, more wildlife will be protected, more people will be inspired to care about the natural world. And somewhere along the way, there will certainly be plenty of laughter, unexpected animal antics, and unforgettable moments that remind us why this story continues to capture hearts around the world. Because when passion, family, and a love for nature come together, the adventure never
Robert's
truly
journey
ends.
continued, something even more fascinating began to unfold. The world wasn't just watching a wildlife conservationist row into his role. People were witnessing the quiet transformation of a young man discovering his own identity while honoring an extraordinary past. For many fans, the name Irwin instantly brings back memories of the legendary energy of Steve Irwin. His fearless personality, his wild enthusiasm, and his unforgettable way of teaching people about animals made him one of the most beloved wildlife figures in history. But for Robert Irwin, that legacy is more than a memory people watch on television. It's a personal story that continues to shape every step he takes. As Robert spends more time working with wildlife, traveling for conservation projects, and meeting people who are inspired by his father, he often finds himself hearing stories that make him smile. Fans approach him with shining eyes, sharing memories of how Steve changed the way they looked at nature. Some people say they became wildlife biologists because of those television adventures. Others say they simply learned to respect animals more because of the enthusiasm Steve shared with the world. Every time Robert hears these stories, it reminds him how powerful one person's passion can be. And it also reminds him why he continues the mission. But Robert has his own style of doing things. Where Steve's energy was explosive and larger than life, Robert often balances excitement with a calm curiosity. He enjoys observing animals quietly, studying their behavior, and capturing beautiful moments through his photography. His camera has become one of his most powerful tools. Instead of always standing in front of the lens, Robert sometimes prefers being behind it, waiting patiently for the perfect shot. A bird spreading its wings at sunrise, a reptile moving slowly through tall grass, a wild animal looking directly into the camera as if it understands the moment. These photographs don't just show wildlife, they tell stories. They remind people that animals aren't simply background characters in our world. They are living, breathing creatures with their own lives, instincts, and beauty. And through those images, Robert continues spreading the same message his father once shared with the world. Protect what you love. But Robert's life isn't only about serious conservation work. There are plenty of light-hearted moments, too. Friends often describe him as someone who enjoys making people laugh, especially after a long day of work with animals. Sometimes the humor comes from the animals themselves. Working with wildlife means that surprises are guaranteed. There might be a moment when everything looks perfectly planned for a presentation, and suddenly a curious animal decides to explore somewhere it shouldn't. Instead of panicking, Robert usually turns those moments into jokes. He laughs, the audience laughs, and suddenly what could have been a stressful situation becomes a fun memory. That playful personality has helped him connect with people all over the world. When audiences hear him speak about wildlife, they don't feel like they're listening to a lecture. It feels more like they're sharing an adventure with a friend. And that's exactly what made his father so special. Robert understands that if people feel joy and excitement about animals, they'll be more willing to protect them. The next generation of conservationists might not always discover wildlife through television the way people once did. Today's world is filled with social media, digital storytelling, and fast-moving online platforms. Robert has embraced those changes, By sharing photos, stories, and behind-the-scenes glimpses of life at the zoo, he invites people into a world that many of them have never experienced before. They get to see what it's like to care for animals, rescue wildlife, and work with nature every single day. Sometimes those moments are breathtaking, sometimes they are funny, and sometimes they are deeply emotional, because conservation isn't always easy. There are times when rescuing animals means facing difficult realities about the challenges wildlife face in the modern world. But Robert believes hope is stronger than fear. He believes that if enough people care, positive change is always possible. And perhaps that belief is one of the greatest gifts passed down from Steve Irwin. The Irwin legacy was never about fame. It was about love. Love for animals, love for nature, and love for sharing that passion with the world. Robert carries that love with him everywhere he goes. Whether he's speaking to crowds, photographing wildlife, or simply walking through the zoo at sunrise, he knows he's part of something bigger than himself, a mission that began long before him and will continue long after. Fans who watch Robert today often feel something familiar in his spirit, not because he's trying to imitate his father, but because the same genuine excitement lives within him, the same curiosity, the same kindness toward animals, and the same dream of a world where humans and wildlife can exist together in harmony. As his story continues, one thing becomes clear. Robert Irwin is not just continuing a legacy, he is shaping its future. With every new adventure, every rescued animal, and every story shared with the world, he adds another chapter to a journey that began with passion and continues with purpose. And somewhere out there, in the wild places his father loved so much, the spirit of adventure still lives on, guiding the next generation, inspiring new dreamers, and reminding us all that protecting the natural world is one of the most exciting adventures anyone can choose.